We're living in an era of fake news when a lot of what you find on the internet, especially, but also in print, is simply not true. It's hoax, it's fake, it's deliberately placed there to confuse you and make you think certain things. A lot of it is political propaganda. A lot of it is just there to sow discord and confusion. So, how do you find your way through this maze of truth and untruth? How do you evaluate websites, things that information you find on the internet? How do you evaluate whether it's true or not? Well, I think it's fair to say that obviously you can't believe everything you find on the web just because it's there and it looks snazzy. Doesn't mean it's true. So here's a website which is purporting to show the first male pregnancy. Here's one, well, Area 51, aliens, is it true or not? And some of it is totally ridiculous. So, how can you navigate through this maze? How can you tell what's trustworthy and what is not? Well, I think the first thing that you can do is, if you look at the information being presented, ask yourself a simple question. Does it fit with everything else that you know? So if it kind of seems to fit in with everything else you know about the world, then it's probably more trustworthy than something that just comes out of the blue and is totally different. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't be surprised by things. New developments, new research, new findings can pop up, and maybe it's true. But you kind of need to look at that information a lot more closely than things that fit with what you know. So a website saying that, a particular store is offering 20% off, well, stores tend to do that. So you have no reason to doubt it. A website suggesting that male pregnancy, well, have you ever heard of male pregnancy? If a man had been pregnant, wouldn't it be big news? Wouldn't it be all over CNN? Wouldn't it be all over, you'd find it a lot. So you'd think we'd have heard about it if it were true. The second tip is fact check elsewhere. So if something is repeated, it's kind of more likely to be true. So if someone runs in and says that the whole school's been given the afternoon off, and they heard it from Mrs. Rogers, well, that might or might not be true. But the more people who are confirming that, the more likely it is that it's true. So what I always do is, for example, male pregnancy. Oh, I've never heard of male pregnancy before. Let me Google it. So I Google it. And if you look down this list, this is a search I actually did a few years ago. You'll see that here we go, the first human male pregnancy, Mr. Lee Ming-wei. So it looks true. But you'll notice that this is the site that we're actually fact checking. So here's one example, malepregnancy.com. Well, that's the site we're trying to check. Is the information on this site accurate? The science of male pregnancy is still in the experimental stage and will not be available to the public in the immediate future. In vitro fertilization techniques. Malepregnancy.com. Okay, so it's still the same site. Male pregnancy Wikipedia refers to the incubation of one or more embryos or fetuses by the male of any species. All pregnancies in the animal kingdom, So I'd have a look at that and see what it says about male pregnancy, but it sounds quite scientific. It sounds fairly accurate. It's talking about the incubation of embryos by the male of the species. I know that the seahorse does that, for example. So, that looks like a promising area where you could research. Nowhere does it highlight, nowhere is it saying that it's human male pregnancy. Okay, here are some images, and you'll notice again, well, they seem to come from the site that we're fact-checking. So we still only have one source for this story. Mr. Lee Ming-wei. Okay, this is on YouTube, but it's talking about the same thing. So maybe that's corroborative evidence, but I would actually follow that link to see where it ends up, because you might find that it actually comes from this site. Snopes claim a man who has had an embryo implanted in his abdomen is engaged in the world's first human male pregnancy. Status false. So this has been fact-checked by Snopes. Snopes is a website which does fact-checking, mainly political fact-checking. And some people say, well, this a little bit biased, but nevertheless, they are indicating that this is a false story. So this should really be ringing alarm bells in your head at this point. And here we go, the man's first male pregnancy, urban legends. Okay, and if you follow this link, you'll see it's talking about this site, malepregnancy.com, and it's exposing this as a hoax site. In fact, this was set up. It was set up to actually teach students about how to evaluate websites. It was set up as a deliberately hoax website. It looks totally convincing, but it's not. So this tip is very important. Go and fact check yourself. Google it and see what comes up. And you might see that it's actually highlighted as being false. Look for things like Snopes and look for things like urban legends and so on. And look to see if it's replicated on more than one website. All of this seems to go back to malepregnancy.com, the site that we're fact checking. The third tip is you've also got to do some research on the author. So the site itself, but also who's saying this. So if someone is a recognized expert in their field, it doesn't mean they can't be wrong. They could be wrong, but they would probably know a lot more than you or I about a topic. So, for example, if the information is coming from a Harvard professor, it's more likely to be true, probably because they have a reputation, they have a certain status as being an expert in a particular field, rather than just some random guy. So fact check the author and see if anything is said about them. You know, are they exposed to someone who's maybe not as reputable as they seem? By the way, you've also got to think about, you know, if you're Googling a Harvard professor, are they an expert in what they're talking about? So if you're Googling and it's a Harvard law professor and they're talking about law, well, they probably know what they're talking about. But if they're talking about fashion sense, well, what would a Harvard law professor know about fashion? You know, you've got to think about, are they qualified in the field that they are talking about? Are they an expert in the field that they're talking about? So also fact check the author. Then look at a website itself. You know, cheesy information often comes in cheesy packaging. So if a website looks dodgy, then it may well be. If money and corporate backing has gone into something, then that might indicate that the person or the information there available is reliable. Also look at the URL. So .org and .ac are probably more reliable than .coms or just random sites which have been set up by people. So why would a .com possibly be not reliable? Well, .com, remember, refers to companies. So these are commercial concerns. And commercial concerns want to sell things. So very often the information they present is all about selling something. And they're selling their product. And they wouldn't necessarily mention if their product is damaging. So, for example, fizzy drinks that contain aspartame. Well, aspartame is a byproduct of chemical warfare. And if you Google it, you'll find out that there's long been contention about how dangerous it is, with lots of research. It was originally banned. But obviously, Coca-Cola is not going to tell you that its products, which contained aspartame until just a few years ago, they never told you it was dangerous, and yet it is now banned. And the reason they're not going to tell you is because they make a profit out of it. So .coms could be led by money and could hide the truth from you. .ac, well, that refers to academic institutions like universities, wits.ac, for example. Academics are more likely to be motivated by seeking the truth. After all, that's their business, to find out about things, to research things. So it's not that academics are necessarily, well, they might be wrong, but they're more likely to be searching for the truth than, for example, a commercial concern. .orgs Well, orgs are organizations. So often organizations will be into researching or informing the public about a particular issue. Now, again, they could have an axe to grind. Maybe they are an organization which has a particular point of view, and that point of view might or might not be right. So very often organizations are grinding an axe, but they're probably more likely to be accurate than a commercial concern, because their interest might well lie in getting information out to the public. So look at the URL and tend to trust .ac or .edu sites more than others, because education is normally about the truth. Organizations, yeah, they might well be trying to inform the public about some issue and carrying accurate information. .coms, well, they're trying to make a profit and they might not be so motivated by the truth. But Google, for example, if an organization is saying something, Google that organization. What is that organization all about? Do they have a good reputation? Google the researchers. Try and find out that way. And a very good tip is to use research portals like .ipl.org. So when you're searching something, don't just go onto Google, go onto ipl.org and then search for something, because these sites have all been reviewed by human beings and checked for reliability and accuracy. So you know that if it's coming up in this search engine, it's going to be more accurate. So putting that all together, here are your top tips. Does the information fit with everything else you know? Is it confirmed by other sources when you Google it? Is the author respectable? You've got to Google and check them as well. And the website, does that look accurate? Does that look like they carry useful information? And wherever possible, use reviewed search portals such as ipl.org. I'm going to leave you with this poster, and you can look at it at your leisure. But you need to think also about currency. Is information up to date? So that sometimes is a big deal. So information that changes rapidly should be up to date. Information which doesn't change so rapidly, for example, the land speed of a cheetah, presumably hasn't changed in the last 50 years or so, then you can probably believe that kind of thing. Latest research on nuclear physics, well, that changes all the time. So currency is very important. How up to date is it? The author and the website publishing it, the authority, in other words. Is this an authoritative site? How reliable is it? Is it just opinion? Is it just someone's point of view? Is it just propaganda being peddled? Or has it been scientifically researched, studied, looked at? And the purpose. Does the person have an axe to grind? Are they saying something because it benefits them, or are they really seeking after the truth? Use these things to try and find out whether there's something fishy going on.